Hello, guys. It's Sunday, so you know what that means. It's story time, and we are reading A Taste of Your Own Magic. And I can't wait to get into this week's reading because, if I said it before, we meet a lot of creatures in this book. This is another section where we are about to meet a new creature, and I have fun with this part. Mostly because Sage's reactions to meeting new creatures are always entertaining because remember, she is brand new to this world. And so being brand new, she it's a lot of unexpected surprises when she meets someone new and discovers what they do. So we've already met a Djinn. That was earlier in, I think, the first reading. And we're going to meet, no, I'm going to let you guys figure it out. So why don't we jump on in? We are on chapter 5 for those of you who are reading along. And if not, just listen along and enjoy. Let's count how many times I trip over my tongue because let's face it, you know what's going to happen. I trip over my tongue just talking, so we know what's going to happen when reading. All right, let's jump on in. Chapter 5. Sage stepped into Ava's office, cape still hanging like a security blanket around her neck, determined to say her vows. The moment had come, and for all her joking and silly antics, she couldn't deny the weight of the decision that lay before her. She took a good, hard look at her wrist, the mark of her people, the Terras. Where once she'd found the lines in their haphazard pattern hideous, they now clearly resembled the tree of life. Surrounding its branches, freckles in the shape of leaves created a canopy. The base of the trunk turned into roots that twisted and wound down and around, creating a semicircle below. The sound of Ava clearing her throat suggested that Sage had stood studying. There's one. Studying her mark for far too long. She looked up sheepishly. Her appearance was already impish enough to earn her a place on Ava's shit list. She might be new, but no one was special when it came to the grand high poobah of the Las Vegas office. I need a few words with Miss Cynwrig before we begin. Ava dismissed Gray at the door, waving him off as if he were an annoying fly. Being alone with Ava in a room filled with weapons really felt like a bad idea. Eyes of turquoise scrutinized Sage from the other side of the desk. Hard and cold as the stone they were named after, Ava's eyes reflected no emotion as she stared across the mahogany expanse. Sage tugged uncomfortably at her neck, loosening the cape. Admittedly, it was over the top, and in the company of Devon or Gray, it had been a statement of her true nature. Standing in front of Ava, however, Sage felt more than a bit childish. But she had resolved to wear it while she awaited her boss's next order. Never fails, the phone has to ring when I'm doing something. Sorry about that, guys. But that's what happens in live reads, right? Where did we leave off here? Sage felt more than a bit childish, but had resolved to wear it while she awaited her boss's next orders. Oppressive silence made the moment all that much more unnerving. Sage dropped her gaze submissively as she looked down. She found a subtle but very important change in the room. The normal fixture of Ava's laptop, which usually sat dead center of the large desk, had been replaced with a book as thick as cinder block. Do you know what this is? Ava asked. Runes were etched into the ancient-looking leather binding, symbols Sage had seen only once before, on her boss's wrist. She never dared ask how old Ava was. But if the book were any indication of her time in service, then it was clear that they'd both hung around for the better part of a century or more. A leather strap that might have well been a belt for as long as it was held the book closed. Book of records? Sage mumbled. Devon had given her a few history and mythology books, but none near as massive. Even the books she'd seen Karn release from his personal library had not appeared as ancient as this intimidating tome. It had to be special. Family lines of all the Terras, maybe? More or less, Ava smiled approvingly. And that little gesture filled Sage with an unusual sense of pride. This is the book that you will swear an oath on. Like a Bible? If you need to use that word to equate the importance of what you're undertaking, sure. It's a recording of family lineages, as we know them. This one, in particular, has been chosen for you. It speaks of the mother and her sacrifice and the original family bloodlines. It reminds us of the tree of life and our connection to it. Ava's fingers tiptoed across the binding. Our people were the answer to a problem. We all began amongst the warring masses. The blood of the ethereal, elemental, and shade all flow through your veins. A chill ran down Sage's spine. She understood the significance. Visions had come to her in a dream when her mother had gone dark, and she'd seen the carnage of the first great magical war. The mother stripped us of our magic, but not our roots. Ava's voice grew louder, commanding Sage's full attention. What she gave in return was the ability to protect the very magic that corrupted our ancestors. Its influence is still felt to this very day, and this is why A.S.S.E.T is here. I'm ready. For what? Ava cut her off before she could finish the sentence. Do you know what it is you're agreeing to? That had been the question plaguing Sage's mind since she'd learned about A.S.S.E.T. Some of the magical world looked to the agency as a police force. Others felt they were rulers, demanding obedience out of fear of retribution. Some hated the Terras outright, whether or not they worked for A.S.S.E.T. None of that truly answered the question, and Sage found herself unable to do the same aloud. Our sole purpose is to protect magic from being corrupted, as the mother once charged us to do. Ava's eyes fell to the chain around Sage's neck. Buried under her shirt, the pendant laying against Sage's chest, its deadly power kept safe, out of sight, but not forgotten. You and I share a secret that need never be spoken aloud. You're already a guardian of magic. You've seen the corruption that it's capable from, even in the most innocent among us. To accept a position here at A.S.S.E.T is to pledge to do just that, not only in secret, but in all things, for as long as there's breath in your lungs. Ava locked eyes with Sage once more, like a predator scenting its prey, ready to strike the killer blow. You've proven to me that you are capable. You have seen what we do, and why. Are you ready to say your vow and take your place with us? This was it. Time to put up or shut up. She had already made her decision, but for some reason confirming it here and now made Sage's heart pound so hard it felt that it might punch a hole through her chest. She gulped down the knot in her throat, hoping that it would help the anxiety, but it only served to mute her voice. She mouthed the word yes, but rather than hear it in her own voice, the only sound that escaped was a dry rasp of air. Gray, you may return. Ava called out, startling Sage with the sudden volume of her voice. Her partner had to have been waiting at the door. The moment his name was called, the knob on Ava's door turned and he entered the room. I'm here to bear witness, he said mechanically, as if he'd uttered the words more times than he'd like to admit. Scripted and oozing with the prospect of ceremony. It gave Sage a small thrill of excitement. Might as well make a show of it. She was, after all, signing her life away. Gray held an old-fashioned quill and a pot of ink, further adding to the excitement of a real swearing-in. She hoped to see more people file into the room wearing robes and chanting. Sage glanced around, waiting to see who or what else might come in. But after moments of silence, save for the papers being shuffled around, her excitement faded. The mother has blessed you with the mark. You are one of her special children, called to guard the ancient magic that runs through your veins. Ava dryly read from the pages in front of her. Honor, duty, and so forth. Read the manuals. She set the papers down and skimmed over the details. On the job training, necessary equipment, and financial management are provided by the agency. Next of kin will be notified and recruited upon your death. Are you ready to take your place with the anonymous Supernatural Security and Elimination Task Force? Sage nodded. I need you to acknowledge verbally, Miss Cynwrig. Yes, Sage replied. Ava looked to Gray. Witness. I have heard her acknowledgement. He signed off as a witness, followed by Ava. Once they were done scrawling their names on the paper, they were stacked and laid out on the book. Good. Ava slid the book over. You will read and sign here. She hoped for a bit more ceremony. Given the importance of what she was doing, Had this been part of her weekly game night, Matt would have had candles all around the room, ambient music playing, and maybe even a few sticks of incense. Instead, she got Sir Grumpalot and the Wicked Witch of the West giving her a high-pressured sales pitch. At least she had the cloak. Devin had come through like a champ with that one. Immature as it might seem to Ava, or even Gray, it was a symbol of her accomplishment, and more pomp and circumstance than she was getting now. Sage wrapped herself in it as Gray nudged the ancient writing implement towards her. Sage looked down at the words on the page. The mother has given her blood. She has bestowed on me this great gift, and in return I will protect that blood from being spilled. I will uphold the laws of magic over the laws of men. I will not judge between the races of magic. I will punish only those who break the mother's laws. I will keep the magical world secret from men to the best of my ability. I and those who follow in my bloodline shall follow these orders from now until the end of time. My roommate knows about me. Is that going to be a problem? Sage asked, hesitating to sign anything that prevented her from speaking openly to Matt. He was more than just a mere human. He was her rock. Putting a gag order on her when it came to him was simply impossible. She couldn't keep anything secret from him for long. I wish you hadn't said anything to him, but within reason, some humans must know about us, Ava replied impatiently, her eyes already jumping to the laptop that lay closed on the credenza behind her desk. Sign here. She pointed to a spot at the bottom of the page. And initial all the statements, please. Sage pulled out the quill and dipped it into the ink. She had signed her name, expecting to see some kind of magic happening on the page, and then realized that since she was a Terra, there would be no magic attached to her hand. It was simply ink, and because she had never used a quill before, her signature bled heavily into the page, rendering it nearly unreadable. The same thing happened with her initials, but it didn't seem to matter to Ava or Gray. Very good. Ava grabbed the contract and snapped the book shut. She rounded to the desk and returned to her seat. The still-drying ink continued to spread out on the page as she thrust it unceremoniously into a file and tossed it into her box. That's it? Sage asked. As much as she'd struggled with the decision to sign on with A.S.S.E.T, the act felt extremely anticlimactic. Were you expecting a party? Ava's tone sharpened. She stowed the book in a lower drawer of her desk and immediately retrieved her laptop. Kind of. I mean, if I'm being completely honest. Ava reached into her desk and pulled out a small plastic bottle. Before Sage could see what was inside, Ava opened it and poured the contents into her hand. She threw a shower of purple glitter at Sage and said, Poof, you're an agent. Had Ava's expression shown even the tiniest bit of amusement, Sage would have laughed at the gesture, but it was clearly done in spite, so Sage kept quiet and blinked away the specks that hit her face. Now, if we're done with the formalities, take off that stupid cloak. You and Mr. Maddox need to have a chat with the mentalist on the strip. There's been a report, 2 of his assistants not surviving his magic tricks. On to Chapter 6. The Las Vegas Strip might only be a few short miles in the hospitality corridor of the city, but once across its boundaries, visitors are magically transported to the land of adult fantasies, a world completely unto its own, gauchely decadent, promising tantalizing riches to those who want to tempt fate. Anything one's heart desires can be had for a price, even items not listed on the public menu. What happens in Vegas? Everybody knows how it works. All sins are forgiven, or at least forgotten with enough alcohol. Mutually assured destruction keeps those with better memories from letting slip the truth of the mischief that they were party to. Sage's magical immunity couldn't protect her as Gray drove his bike straight down the center of Las Vegas Boulevard. Like a cartoon come to life, the strip was alive and animated with colors that couldn't possibly belong to the real world. Try as she might, there was no denying the twinges of excitement that as she looked up to the neon glow and dazzling lights. Video screens 3 stories high flashed advertisements for high-end restaurants, boutiques, and spa treatments, luxuries she'd never been able to afford. With the right player's card and a little time spent at the slots, she might be able to earn some points. Deviousness wrapped in simplicity. It was no wonder that most people didn't bother to resist the allure. Anyone could be a winner and have it all. All one had to do was play. Vegas in a nutshell. Temptations aplenty, orchestrated to keep patrons trapped in a few square miles of the city, creating willing prisoners with the promise of leaving richer than they arrived. If that didn't do the trick, there was always the other distractions to throw money at. Scantily clad women, thunderous men from down under, Broadway-style shows, endless buffets, and all manner of shopping. Truly an adult playground, built on one thing: disposable money. Living in Las Vegas, at least for Sage, had meant staying far away from the Strip. Temptation was easier to deal with when it was completely avoided. Being short on money and having even less luck meant nothing could be thrown away on games of chance. Gray drove his bike up to the third floor of the Mega Resort's parking garage and led Sage straight into the heart of Fantasyland. Clicks and pings and the rhythmic ding 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 of slot machines provided ambient noise as they arrived on the gaming floor. Hardly her first time inside of a casino, Sage knew what to expect. But in the moment, she struggled to ignore the deceptive noises suggesting people were winning jackpots all around her. It's all a trick. She shook herself and tried to refocus on Gray, who stood reading the signs above, searching for the right path. Everywhere she looked, there was electronic machines screaming for attention, harkening back to her childhood days spent at the arcade. They beckoned with HD graphics and playable games, just beyond lining up cherries. Snap out of it. Gray nudged her forward. You act like you've never been here before. Well, not this casino, no, she replied, her eyes roaming towards the tables at the center of the gaming floor. The gentle clack of chips being stacked and moved around on the felt added another layer of distraction. You've seen one casino, you've seen them all. Gray alone seemed immune to the siren's call all around him. Who needed magic when you could wield temptation so easily? Everything was carefully choreographed and packaged to trick the senses. The colors, the placement of the variety of games, the ease of access to alcohol, the lack of natural lighting, or clocks on the wall to let players know how long they've been there. The house always wins for a reason. They know the game better than anyone else. Gray power walked across the gaming floor, a man on a mission. Sage followed closely as he weaved through the machines and found a secret door along the wall. Employee hallway, he said, as he opened and held the door for her. Keep your head up. Act like you belong here. Sneaking behind enemy lines. A devious smirk kinked her lips. Gray had suddenly taken on a different look. Replace that stupid fedora with a fez and slap a bow tie on him, and he could easily become the Doctor. This newfound devil-may-care attitude while entering a restricted area was exactly the kind of antics 11 would get up to. Sage whispered, Geronimo, as she stepped into the brightly lit employee hallway. What? Allons-y? She giggled at her own private joke. Zack would have totally gotten the reference. The only good thing about that vampire informant. Gray, on the other hand, stood clueless for a moment before shaking his head and moving on. Did we just enter the Twilight Zone or something? Sage wondered aloud. A stark contrast to the adult playground she'd just left, this area had an institutionalized blandness that numbed all excitement. White walls as far as the eye could see had been dulled into a sandy cream from years of wear. The only twinkling lights came from fluorescent bulbs nearing the end of their life. A labyrinth of hallways ran through, underneath, and behind every one of the public areas of the casino floor and hotel. Signage consisted of arrows with acronyms, though a few she understood. The one labeled EDR led to a hallway wafting with fresh smell of coffee, something she desperately wanted. Less talky, more walky. Gray moved as if he'd been there before, decisively heading up one hallway and down the next. Sage followed as closely as she could without looking too much like a lost little child. If she did get lost, who knew when she would finally emerge? Down one flight of stairs and into a new, but no less drab hallway. Gray led them towards a door labeled Small Theater. A nameplate below the sign read, Magnificent Marin the Mentalist. Gray adjusted his fedora and cracked his knuckles. Definitely not the Doctor, 11 or otherwise. Fedoras are not cool. His sudden posturing made him look like an angry hipster. Thank goodness he didn't have the goatee or skinny jeans. Partner or not, she'd have to draw the line there. You gonna bust some heads in there, tough guy? She asked as Gray knocked on the door. His jaw tightened as he struggled to ignore her and listen for sounds. The hallway was quiet enough to hear a pin drop. Footsteps from employees in other areas of the building echoed distantly, but nothing else could be heard from where they stood. Maybe he's not here yet? Sage suggested. Gray grunted as a reply, all the while keeping his eyes on the door as if trying to see through it. So, what's the deal with this guy? Sage asked. Do you ever shut up? His tone, more than the question, threw her off guard. They had been ribbing each other since day one, but his sharpness now suggested something else. Sage bit back the angry comment that she would have thrown at him. They were on the job, and she was supposed to be acting professional, the opposite of what she had been doing. What would Mr. Marin the Magnificent or anyone else think if they saw acid agents bickering? She put on her game face and gave Gray a curt nod to show she understood. Listen and learn. Gray's eyes still fixed on the closed door. When his second knock came and went unanswered, he tried the knob. Unlocked. What were the odds? Gray nodded for her to follow and put a finger to his lips as if she needed another reminder to be quiet. Marin might be magnificent on stage, but if the disastrous state of his room revealed anything behind closed doors, he was a complete train wreck. Papers covered every inch of his desk. Some had taken the plunge towards an overstuffed garbage can, only to end up adding to another equally large pile on the ground. Trash appeared to morph into clothing as the landfill reached the dresser, where clothes were escaping from an overstuffed drawer. A few costumes hung on hangers on a small rack, but one stiff breeze might send them to the ground. Has he been robbed? Sage's first thought spilled out of her mouth despite Gray's warning to be quiet. Gray walked to the desk and sifted through the papers. Old bills by the looks of them. Inside a casino? I doubt that. Sage recognized the red stamp of final notice on more than one. Someone's in trouble, she whispered. Gambling problems would be my guess, Gray replied. He turned towards the dressing table. Bottles of rum and vodka peeked out from a curtain of feather boas that draped around the mirror. And drinking, neither of which are magical, so I don't care. Motive, not magic, Sage suggested. A toilet flushed in an adjacent room. Gray crossed his arms and turned towards the restroom door. Known drunk, money problems, theatrical type. Sage expected to see a shaggy, pot-bellied, and stinking washed-up old magician, the kind who employed the scantiliest of clad assistants to cover his own appearance for shows. Her jaw nearly dropped when Magnificent Marin came through the door. Clearly the name had more to do with looks than magic. She could see through the glamour, so his looks were the real deal. He might as well have stepped off the pages of a men's magazine. Perfect strands of golden hair, not a lock out of place, framed a strong and muscular face with a chiseled jaw, cleft chin, and glittering emerald eyes. He had the kind of perfection that could only come from magic. Some people have all the luck. A.S.S.E.T, I presume? Marin flashed Sage a smile that nearly blinded her with its brilliance. Well, you clean up well, Gray replied with a scowl. It is my job. Marin waved his hand with a flourish to highlight his immaculate suit. Unfortunately, maid service is not among my skills. I do apologize for the state of my office. Saw one too many of them in half? Gray's deadpan delivery failed to convey whether he was joking. This one doesn't mince words, does he? Marin met Sage's eyes with a flirtatious wink. She shook her head and kept her mouth closed for the moment, still processing the sight of him, contrasting the state of his office. Bit of a low blow coming from A.S.S.E.T. I thought you guys were supposed to help solve cases, not insult victims. Marin's smile had to have been plastered on. It didn't falter for a minute while he spoke. His words had been directed at Gray, but those sparkling emerald eyes remained locked on Sage. The effect might have been disarming to others, but the more he stared, the less enamored she felt. Sorry, never saw your show, Gray replied, sounding anything but apologetic. But you know of me, certainly. Marin finally turned his attention to Gray. I'm the magnificent mentalist. I can read your thoughts, predict your future, and temporarily remove your inhibitions. You're a siren. Yeah, I've read your file. Gray answered, unamused. What I want to know is what you think happened to your missing staff. The brilliance of Marin's grin dimmed. If I knew what happened, I wouldn't have called you. Humor us and take a guess. Gray crossed his arms. They just failed to show up for work, Marin shrugged. Calls, text, voicemail, all go unanswered. Paychecks? Gray asked. Marin's eyes narrowed to crinkled slits, and the muscle in his jaw started to twitch. Are you insinuating something? There was a sinister side to that man. That was a bet Sage could make. His whole persona was a caricature. She'd never met a siren before, but it didn't take a Terra to spot a sleazeball. Gray's eyes darted to the desk and back. Just asking questions. Paychecks have always been cut on time. Marin slithered between a pile of debt and Gray's accusing glare. My personal finances do not mix with business. In my experience, that's never the case. Gray kept his tone light, but Sage could see he'd already written this off as a simple case of no call, no show. Money will be a problem if I have no staff to help me with my shows. That's why I called you here, not to be insulted. Again, just asking questions. We need to get a full picture on how the operation runs to establish a reason for their departure. Gray's tone remained flat. My girls had no reason to leave. Today's payday, and they still haven't come in to pick up their checks. No call, no show. They're not at home either. They're gone. Poof! He snapped his finger like magic. His pun had clearly been intended, but he lacked any solid evidence to back it up. How do you know this? Sage asked. Their cars are still in the employee parking garage, Marin answered, swiping a memo written on the hotel stationery. I've been put on notice to have them moved or they'll be towed. Been parked without moving for going on a week now. And your employees are all human, or? Sage asked. Gemini twins, Marin replied cheerfully. So they weren't hired by the hotel's HR department? Gray asked, sounding a little more interested now. No, my contract with the hotel pays me for shows. Whom I hire is my own business, Marin replied. And the people you hired? Gray asked. They are from the sortilege agency, all registered, I assure you. Marin replied again, sounding a little put off by having to answer such accusing questions. Any disagreements between you and your staff? Harassment? Salary? Gray asked. Marin's eyes flitted down to the past due notices piled high on his desk. As I already said, my people are always paid first. And better than any other showgirls on the strip, I'd wager. Please, no bets. Gray nearly broke into a laugh, but caught himself. And who else gets paid? Are there any debts you haven't settled? Enemies you have made that might like to sabotage your show? Marin loosened his collar. None who would cause this kind of trouble. I take care of those issues when they crop up. How, exactly? Sage finally found a question she wanted to ask. Despite being too good-looking, he wasn't overly muscular. She doubted he'd hold up in a fight against a few thugs. Let's just say I use my charms to ensure those I owe money to either forgive or extend my credit. He finished with a wink. Siren, Gray whispered like a curse. If Marin's powers worked to alter the mental state of those around him, that could make many, many enemies. Sage wondered if his people had been run off by someone or had bolted to avoid his powers altogether. She hoped Gray might have had better ideas. I'm going to need a list of those whom you say have forgiven you, Gray said. I assure you, no one who might have issue with me would ever take that anger out of my staff. Marin replied, a little less cocky than he'd been before. It's bad form to hurt the innocent. They'd break my legs before ever hurting my staff. But running off your staff does essentially break your legs, Sage whispered to herself. Anyone could put two and two together there. But that didn't explain why their cars were still there in the parking lot. One missing piece, screaming foul play. It just didn't fit. How will you manage your show in the meantime? My dear, I'm still the mentalist with or without the eye candy. I'll just have to add an extra charm until I can secure another assistant. Care to stay for a show? You could be a volunteer. It was a damn good thing his powers had no effect on her. The eyes alone were enchanting, and combined with the confidence and quick wit, she could see him working his powers well enough to entertain. But what was a magician or a mentalist without a pretty assistant? Make me a list of your debtors and we'll be on our way. Gray might not have looked it, but he had the dangerous tone down pat. And the staffing agency contracts too. If it will help, Marin threw himself into his desk chair and started scrawling out names on the back of a past due bill. Gray snatched the paper when Marin finished. You hear anything else? Let us know. We'll be in touch. So there is chapter 6, and we got to meet another new creature. What do you guys think of Marin? Any ideas? Let's go to the chat section here, see who we've got today. Well, hello, Sue. Welcome back. I'm so glad you joined us again. And it's morning in Australia now. You guys from the future. We've got a Rebecca. Hello. The ringtone creeped me out. I'm sorry. That's actually my Doctor Who theme. And it's just, the general ringtone for most calls. I have some specialized calls or specialized ringtones for people. But yeah, that's my Doctor Who theme because I am a Doctor Who nerd. I mean, you can see my TARDIS back there. I'm super here. I like that. Pun intended, I hope. Quitting is like, I'm off the case. Here's my cloak and my glitter. I'll see you in hell. Yes, we've met a Djinn and we've met a siren so far. And that is not the only creatures you're going to meet. In fact, this book probably has more creatures than any of the others in the series. And I love all the interactions coming up. Oh, I'm so excited. But we have to wait until we get to those chapters. But I think you guys will really, really enjoy them. There's a lot of comedy involved in it. And I hope it comes through, even with all my flubbing and tripping over my own tongue. So we have now met Marin the Magnificent Mentalist. He's a fun character. Any thoughts on him? Any thoughts on what might have happened to his assistants? Or is it too early for you guys to start making assumptions? And while we're at it, how is your week going? This is going to be a very interesting week for most of us. And we all have our fingers crossed and hope that everything goes well. And there goes my phone again. Never fails. Murphy's Law. I'll probably have to call them back soon. If they called me twice now, it's probably important. Anyways, so back to what I was saying. How's your weekend? How's your weekend going? Are you guys ready for the week ahead? Any plans for the week? I'm going to hunker down and stay home and try and stay off of social media and news probably for the week, just because for my own mental health, it's easy to get sucked into all the drama going on, and I don't need that right now. I mean, obviously I'll pay attention to the important stuff in the news, but I plan on kind of hanging back this week and being a bit of a hermit and just getting work done and looking forward to next week, which my birthday, not this coming week, but next week. So I'm going to try and look forward to something happy for that week. But this week I plan on just staying in closed doors, staying off the social media and the news, and trying to keep positive. I want to have positive thoughts going forward. Just like this weekend, I love reading to you guys. This is like my point that I look forward to all week. I'm like, I can't wait to get to Sunday. I can't wait to read you guys the next chapter or two. And we've been doing them in twos this time because the book is kind of organized with smaller, faster chapters. So for the most part, we're going to see a lot of double chapters. Now, there are a few longer chapters, and we'll do a single chapter if it runs long, because I don't want to run this more than 20, 30 minutes or so. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do so look forward to this, and I look forward to hearing your reactions to what happens in the chapter and your thoughts going forward and what you think's gonna happen to the characters. There's a lot of fun stuff coming. This is a really, really fun book, and I'm so glad you guys are here so I can share it with you. Let me check and see what's going on in the comment section. Oh no, Rebecca, you sprained your ankle. I'm sorry. You have to tell me what happened. How did that happen? And are you taking care of yourself? I hope so. Is your husband helping take care of you? He better be. Oh, you can't even sit at your desk. Oh, that's the worst. I'm sorry. I hope it doesn't take too long to heal. Feel better. I've seen a lot of people lately not doing so hot. Yesterday when we did Spilling Ink, Jay called out because he feels like he's having a resurgence from his sickness last year, because he had COVID last year towards the end of the year, and it took him out for a couple of weeks. And then yesterday he said he was feeling like it was coming back almost. So please take care of yourself. Try and relax in whatever comfortable way you can. Sucks that you can't even sit at your desk, because I know you're Miss Workaholic, so not being able to sit at your desk is probably a real point of stress for you. All right, guys, we've gone over our 30 minutes. And like I said, I don't want to make these too long. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do appreciate you being here and sharing time with me. And I can't wait to read you some more of this book. So I will see you next week. Remember to take care of yourself. Self-care is important. And stay off social media and the news this week for your mental health. All right. I love you guys. I will see you next time.